gets those two public holidays that everybody, almost everyone, minus essential workers, really get a day off. We're in conversation with Justin Harting, who is a senior legal advisor at Strata-g Labor Solutions. Justin, there is that issue around the essential workers that you mentioned. There is an issue of also navigating really small teams through religious holidays, the kind of planning that is required. I imagine it has to be meticulous to make sure that there are no disruptions. Imagine a small team and it is essential service, maybe.
Yes. No, absolutely. And I mean, ultimately, that's why it's so important to be proactive and flexible in your approach. And you need to understand what your employees' sincerely held beliefs are so that you can make those accommodations for them and be flexible. You could even adjust things like break times, which would then allow staff to then meet their religious obligations without disrupting the operations of the business. So ultimately, it really is about, just understanding the needs of the employees and then, looking ahead, because, I mean, we know that there are going to be these religious holidays. We know well in advance. And then that allows everyone to be able to plan around it and make sure that everyone is accommodated without disrupting any sort of operations or any sort of essential services. It really does come down to that. It's really about understanding and then being proactive.
The role of HR in that and setting up the policies that are aligned with that, the value, the importance of that, as well as training. I think sometimes we have ideas put down in theory, and then there's not sufficient training or education of how to go about implementing those particular policies and ideas so that they don't disrupt the workplace.
Correct. So, I mean, ultimately, once you've gone through your exercise of doing your research and your investigation into your workplace, then training and education become absolutely crucial in helping managers and HR, navigate all the multiple religious holidays, because they'll know what is needed and then they'll be able to better manage and deal with the leave request in a fair manner. I mean, ultimately, the most effective training is that which focuses on cultural sensitivity, religious diversity, and also the legal aspects of religious accommodation, ultimately promoting, a more inclusive and respectful workplace. And, what you could even do is, use real-life case studies and role-playing exercises, and then that can help managers and HR apply their knowledge and skills in practical situations. So they could even use online learning platforms, which then allow them to, learn at their pace and then come back to it at a later stage when needed. So when, they get a specific leave request from a specific employee from a different religion, and they'll be able to say, okay, well, this is what's needed. And ultimately, we can still accommodate this employee without disrupting our operations.
I want to play you a voice note quickly, Justin, where comment or question has come through the line. Please just take a listen.
Hi, CD and Justin. I'm one of those people who simply don't understand why do people have to bring religion in the workplace. But the system where I'm working currently, I think it's simpler in that you are given a certain number of days in a work cycle or in a annum per annum. Then it's up to you how you take those days. If you, for whatever reason, and you manage your leave with your immediate supervisor accordingly. The reason why I'm saying that is that, especially in the black community, everybody just assumes that all of us are Christians, and you find that it's practiced in the workplace in that people have to sing and pray in the morning, and that in some environments can end up impacting on other people's beliefs as well. So that's just a little issue I have with that. Right. Thank you. Great show.
Thank you so much, Mpo. He makes a very important point, Justin. I mean, what's that saying? Assumption makes out of you and me. He makes a very important point there that the assumption shouldn't be that everybody subscribes to Christianity or otherwise. That to some degree, it's also your responsibility to observe your religious holidays.
Yes, ultimately, I mean, that's the long and short of it. We shouldn't assume, and that's why, doing those surveys and investigations into your workplace is so important. And then once you know who the different religions are, as I said, we can go into, it a little bit deeper and we can see, well, this is what is required when observing, these religious holidays and then accommodate accordingly. So if you don't want to have, everyone clapping and singing in the morning and disturbing others, as I said, we can then, make a quiet place available for those particular staff members, and then it doesn't disrupt anyone else. And we can always just adjust and help everyone to ultimately, find an accommodation. So swap out with your colleagues if possible. Maybe you can adjust your working hours or even request to work remotely. Ultimately, everyone does have the right to religious beliefs and freedoms, and we need to accommodate accordingly.
You said earlier that the law doesn't necessarily cater for religious holidays. There's a question of African spirituality, which is often, I find, is still being debated over today, where somebody will say that they've got a calling, they've got to go away for a protected period of time. Navigating that, does that become, and I think the question of compensation, where is it unpaid leave? That also becomes part of the conversations that we ought to have in modern day workplaces, surely.
Yes, correct. And I mean, the Labour Court and the Labour Appeal Court have had occasion to deal with it in the past. And ultimately, where it is established that this is a legitimate calling in terms of African spirituality, people would be entitled to go without having to face the possibility of dismissal. But that also comes with the responsibilities as the employee. You would still need to communicate with your employer and make the necessary arrangements and come to some form of agreement. If you can't take, paid time off, then it would have to be unpaid. Because ultimately, it's like we started our conversation earlier. I mean, only public holidays are recognized as paid time off, and you need to implement proper policies. Gone are the days now where we just say to people, well, look, it's not a recognized public holiday, so I'm not going to allow it. We still need to look into it and come up with those agreements. Sometimes what happens is staff members can take their paid time off and, in terms of normal annual leave, and then they can go off and observe their religious holidays. The other thing is it could be unpaid, and then, there's no sort of negative impact on the employer, but then the employee won't be, paid in terms of no work, no pay principle. And alternatives, other things that can be done is you can actually enter into work-back agreement with your employer or sign an acknowledgement of debt for that time that you've gone off, and you will get paid, but then you will have to pay that money back. So there are many different things that can be done to accommodate all these different beliefs that we have in our country.
I want to bring in Sia now. He's calling in from Paul's off. Sia, good morning to you.
Hi, Titi. How are you?
Very good. Justin is listening.
Good. Hi, Justin. Maybe slightly off topic, but I've always been curious. So let's say, for example, I'm a black South African, but my religion is Muslim, right? And I want to take time off for Eid. So obviously, I would assume that people would automatically expect that if you're a Muslim, you're either of a certain skin tone or from a certain Muslim country. If I happen to be a black South African but practice the Muslim religion, number one, would I have to prove that I'm actually Muslim, like in case my employer doesn't believe me? And if so, how would I prove?
Look, ultimately, at the end of the day, we hope that people wouldn't go to that extent that now they make an assumption and then tell you, okay, well, now you need to prove you are of a certain religion. We'd like to think people have moved away from that, but, ultimately, if that is the case, you would then probably be able to, approach one of your religious leaders at mosque or, at wherever it might be that you meet, and then get them to write confirmation. But like I said, I really hope we aren't going to, require people to do that in the workplace in this day and age.
Justin, just before, I think this is my parting shot, really. I should have actually picked your brain on this earlier. Other disputes along these lines in South Africa that stand out? I mean, you made a case earlier around when I asked you about African spirituality, but other standout cases that are important to recognize that have happened here, that have maybe even been before the CCMA in this regard?
Yeah, so ultimately there have been disputes in the past where people have raised their, religious beliefs, and it's sort of got them into some form of difficulty, or they've suffered some form of detriment within their workplace. And, where you need to now try and make sure that people aren't discriminated against, and you need to have proof, you would get experts in that religion who would say, well, this is a central belief. And ultimately, like I said before, You cannot deny anyone their religious convictions or beliefs, and if you do, you expose yourself to the possibility of a discrimination claim in either the CCMA or even the Labour Court.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to leave it at that. That's Justin Harting, who's a senior legal advisor at Strata-g Labor Solutions. We're speaking there, of course, about navigating multiple religious holidays in the workplace. Very interesting. I didn't know that. First of all, I didn't know how many holidays we had in the year, but I also did not know that it actually was not the law for South Africa. That there's no law, rather. Let me phrase that properly. That there's no law in the country that specifically governs religious holidays, even though we recognize the many public holidays. And then, of course, the issue, of course, as I was pointing out, is that there's only 2 Christian holidays that are part of that line of public holidays. Remember, still to come, we're going to have the health and wellness feature, understanding the science behind how sugar impacts your child's brain. We always hear, do not give that child sugar. I see it a lot of parties where I've got, I think, one notorious cousin who likes to feed all the kids sugar to ramp them up. And all the parents worry because all the parents complain that in the evening they don't get any rest. So we'll try and understand what is the impact of excessive sugar intake on your children and the negative impact it has on their brain function, which potentially leads to many other issues, including memory and focus.